Hey everybody, and welcome to GitHub in Focus. Hi, my name's Martin Woodward. I'm the Director of Developer Relations here at GitHub, and I've been working on developer tools and also on inner source for quite a few years now. And so I'm really pleased that today's conversation we're having at GitHub in Focus is a great conversation with Brittany Istenes on modernizing and unifying development over at Comcast. I've had the pleasure of working with Brittany in the inner source commons, and working and really trying to collaborate and share sort of our knowledge and best practices of trying to do inner source at lots of different organizations. So really looking forward to that session. Now, we've got lots coming up for you today. So first of all, as I say, we've got this conversation with Brittany. But before we get into any of that, some quick housekeeping for you. All of the sessions today are going to be available on demand, and the session from yesterday will also be available. On Thursday, we've got an interactive roundtable style discussion on creating a culture of collaboration. That session won't be recorded, just so everybody feels free to get involved in the conversation and really get engaged. And then on Friday, we're going to have a deep dive session on getting traction with GitHub Actions. That also will be recorded. All the sessions will be available at infocus.github.com, but we'll also be sending out an email after the fact with all the access details. So watch out for that in your inbox. If you missed yesterday's session, that was a really good conversation. I enjoyed that with Dana Lawson. And Dana's the VP of Engineering here at GitHub. And she was sort of sharing how GitHub's helping enterprises increase their velocity by really focusing on the developer experience for your teams, trying to reduce the friction, improve the speed, and improve the velocity of your engineering teams. So as we go in, if you've got any questions, remember the Q&A tabs on the right-hand side of your screen. Say hi there if you want. Well, that's where we're going to ask questions, and then I'll be talking to Brittany. It's going to be a fairly interactive discussion with Brittany and I. And then we've saved some time towards the end where we're going to make sure we try and get through as many of your questions as you can, but also might try and bring some up during the session if we can as well. Now, we'll be digging in and sort of answering those as we go along. If you're joining us from your desktop, we recommend, trying Chrome or Safari or Edge. Firefox works well on the most current version, but, make sure you're up to date. If you aren't able to see the stream, then you have no idea why you're here. You could try refreshing the page if that happens at any point, or you can always go back and watch the recording. And please remember to disable any VPNs or ad blocking software as well, as that can, sometimes affect the quality of the session. If you need help troubleshooting any issues on the platform, please navigate over to the Docs tab on the far right-hand side and select the Help document, where you'll see lots of information there, or you can email the partner Goldcast with support questions. Right, let's get started. Really looking forward to this session, as I say. I think this is going to be the highlight of my week anyway. It always is whenever I get to talk to Brittany. Brittany Istenes is a program manager on open source over at Comcast. And Brittany will be talking about how Comcast is leveraging GitHub to modernize their internal software development and DevOps tools. Now, this is very important in terms of sharing knowledge about how we're doing these across different companies and across different places. And I've always been impressed by the journey that Comcast have been on internally, and then also some of the stuff they're starting to do externally as well. So please remember to use the Q&A if we can. But without further ado, let's bring in my excellent guest for today, Brittany. Hey, Brittany.
Hi, Martin. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks. Joining you live here from Northern Ireland. So it's a bit dark outside, but hopefully there won't be any interruptions or anything like that. Nice and quiet here.
That sounds great. I'm actually coming to you live from Cleveland, Ohio. And it's sunny today and 50 degrees.
Now, have you still got that fantastic cat of yours? Is she still around and things like that? Do we get the pleasure of her company?
Yes. So just everyone, my cat will be making guest appearance randomly. Her name is Captain Meepers, and she will stare at the screen. There's nothing I can do, but she's really cute. And it is what it is. She's a cat.
She's a friend of the show, anyway. So, hey, Brittany, do you want to, rather than me introducing you, do you want to just introduce yourself, really, and tell everybody a little bit about how you became an open source program manager at Comcast? I've had, as you know, I had a similar role at a previous company, but your journey was certainly very different from mine. So, yeah, why don't you share some of that with everybody?
Absolutely. And thank you so much. So, yes, I work in the open source program office at Comcast. I initially started with the company with a main focus on the delivery of all open source software outside of the company, as well as developer relations. Now, this role has grown exponentially, which we'll talk about further down the line today. But it's really cool to be a part of it. But my journey to get here was not traditional by any means. I actually graduated from Temple University with a teaching degree. I'm a lifetime certified K through sixth grade elementary school teacher and N through 12th grade special educator. Yep, pretty cool. I taught fourth and fifth grade for 2 years, and I quickly became the lead technology trainer at the school. I mean, I got my first MacBook in 2011, and so all of a sudden, I'm the lead tech trainer at the school, and I'm noticing these gaps. And I realized, well, there's a disconnect from what the students are learning to what the teachers are teaching them. And that had to do with technology. So I transitioned to an educational technology company, and I worked with superintendents and teachers all across the country. It was an amazing, amazing, amazing experience. I really got to learn all sorts of different coding languages, and it was just awesome. But it came to a point where I plateaued, and I just wanted to keep growing and keep learning because that's the main focus in my life. So I decided to transition to Comcast. One of my friends recommended the company, and I never thought about it before. And I applied, and I met this wonderful group of people to where I'm working in an open source program office, but yet I'm still educating all of these technologists on best practices on a variety of different things. So it's just been really, really, really cool.
Now, you're probably, I know you kind of hidden your light under a bushel there. When you said you plateaued a little bit, you did get an invite, like you didn't get some sort of presidential medal or honor from the Obama White House or something like that. Was that right?
Yeah, that was really cool. So my very first year of teaching, I just dove headfirst into it. And I loved my students. I loved the work that we were doing. And with very limited supplies, we were able to actually be nationally recognized for closing the achievement gap in science on their state standardized test
Wow.
scores. They went from 13% passing proficiency to 73% in the course of a year. And I got goosebumps thinking about it. But yeah, it was fantastic.
Well, shout out to all the teachers that are doing remote
Mhm,
learning right now, because this past year has been, extreme amount of adjustment
mhm.
for everybody. And I think I speak for all of us parents that we're so grateful for all the work that our teachers have been doing to try and adapt to remote learning. So yeah, thank you everybody. Now, I'll be honest, Brittany, it might be because I live, over here in the UK, but I didn't really know that Comcast had much of an open source presence or an open source office until we ran into each other at an Inner Source Commons summit a while ago, and I think that was just before I joined GitHub actually. So, what's the history, around that open source office, and how did it get started? Do you know?
Absolutely. So, roughly right now, we are managing about 200 projects in our public facing organization, Comcast.github.io. And we also have separate organizations for our premier projects like Trickster and Vinyl DNS, Capsule, Kuber Healthy. They're awesome, awesome projects. So please check them out if you haven't yet.
Mhm.
But the journey with Comcast is interesting because they started consuming open source in 2006. And then we started contributing back to open source in 2010. And Comcast launched two relatively very large projects. You have the RDK and CDN, so Content Delivery Network and Reference Design Kit. So RDK is like your set-top boxes, your firmware, really cool stuff. But that started back in 2011 and 12. And then 2013 through 16, we became avid contributors back into the open. So, and we formed Apache Traffic Control, which is currently now incubated in the Apache Software Foundation. And 2017 is when the OSPO, the Open Source Program Office, really formed. We are a small but mighty 6-person team that we handle all of our engineering, compliance tooling, engineering tooling, developer relations, inner source, delivery, and as we all know, if you work in open source, all the gray areas in between.
Yeah,
And
and yeah.
yeah,
I think we've touched. I mean, I think we've touched on open source, which I'm guessing lots of people here at GitHub understand. But you're sort of mentioning like the inner source area there, and so for folks not really familiar with that term, do you want to like explain inner source a little bit? It's a strange term sometimes to get the hold of, and
mhm.
what it is, and why people should care about inner source. Do you think?
Inner source is really, really, really cool. And it takes essentially the same principles as open source, but instead the projects are open and stood up behind the company's firewall for more collaboration and growth. Inner source, it's a common idea and it can make a lot of sense, but we're seeing that it's not widely adopted.
Yeah.
And, and making it work as a whole nother level of organizing and planning. We notice every day we're seeing patterns, we're seeing unifying processes, but taking what that is and making sense of it is bringing into a whole different practice and skill. So, we're looking at it from an open source and inner source perspective. It's paramount that we work together for external and internal developers to create these quality, well-rounded projects that we see today. And if inner source is done well and applied with the same enthusiasm as open source, we've seen it be very successful. I've talked to so many different companies that want to bring open source into their space because they know it keeps technologists happy and attracts young talent. But inner source does have that same principle too.
Mm.
Inner source stops you from consistently reinventing something that already exists and developing the same things that we know already exist. Why are we starting from the ground up when we don't have to? That can be kind of a little demotivating. And we know starting from the ground up, it takes way too much time, resources, it's expensive, it can cause burnout. And we know in 2020, leading into 2021, we have to kind of reinvent the way that we're thinking to keep us motivated. Being on screen, not being able to interact in person with so many people, we have to think outside of the box and think about a different way to collaborate. And you meet people from all across the world working on open source projects, and that makes me happy. So I want to see how we can make sure that this happens internally. I'm a people person, and as I mentioned, I love to learn, and I really think about collaboration a lot. And you look at it too from a different perspective, how I think about it. I think, how many people in my company have I not met yet? How many of these people are directly impacting my day-to-day activities? Inner source can really help close the gaps and make those connections. And, I look at it this way too. If I were to leave a company or my project or, even my organization, would I feel comfortable with my team taking over or another team, or would they even know what I was working on?
Yeah, I completely agree. Quite often when I go talk to companies, they have this like strong sense of ownership of software, when in reality we're maintainers of a software library. Like, how often in your career have you had the opportunity to take a piece of software all the way from initial idea, build it, deploy it, and then run the full life cycle and then shut that software down again? That happens so rarely. Usually we're just the maintainers at a specific point in time, and then you pass the torch on to the next team who then maintain it for the rest of the life cycle. And having this notion of the current maintainer of the software seems to be a lot healthier. But what I've also seen companies who have strong inner source practices have actually been the ones that have found adapting to remote work, the easiest kind of thing, because they've already got kind of some of this asynchronous working patterns going on. So why did Comcast want to introduce open inner source? What was it that kind of really got everybody interested in going down the inner source route?
So this, before I get into Comcast as well,
Yeah.
this is something that I was thinking about over the weekend that I wanted to kind of mention today and see how other people in the forum think
Yeah.
about this as well. So we've heard of KPIs or key performance indicators. We've heard of OKRs or objectives and key results. I'm curious, are these talking points within your company? Are you seeing them successfully being executed? I'm thinking that since a lot of these things are old and yet new, inner source can really align these goals to show that there is collaboration and growth. So I'm looking forward to hearing some questions and feedback about that. But going back to Comcast, Comcast is a Fortune 50 company with roughly 9,000 technologists working on a variety of different projects to support the common goal of innovation within the telecommunications industry. And we know that with any company, small or large, working together is paramount for success, as I mentioned before. But potentially there could be duplicated efforts, which comes back to cost saving. And it happens all the time in so many different industries. So at Comcast, we want to get ahead of that curve. We want to break that wheel of repetitive motion and change the way we think with streamlining projects with consistent collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. And funnily enough, so just in the forums, you were asking for people to join in and tell us what you think. So Tanya was saying hi, and she was also saying that, yeah, around KPIs is definitely an area that they've been getting involved in. And also, while we're doing shout outs to Jeff, Elson, Renier, Patricio, who are joining us and have jumped in to say hi. So yeah, we've already got the questions coming in here. So this is fantastic. So
Good.
right then. So, you know why you want to get started. So kind of, I guess what's next is like what practical steps did you kind of take to bring inner source into the company? You know, how did you get started?
So it really started organically by our one community manager, Sheila, back in 2018. She was consulting with some teams and things like that. And then we decided let's make this grow. So over the past year, the team and I have been working tirelessly of getting our inner source infrastructure off the ground.
Yeah.
Now that the program exists, we're asking how can we make this better for everyone? And one of those ways is I do want to give a shout out to the Inner Source Commons community. Their guidance has been fantastic. The team
Yeah.
members in that community are absolutely wonderful. Just their whole philosophy of thinking around inner source has been great. And I've taken a lot of that knowledge and learning and applied it to what we're doing today. We created, for transparency, a one-stop shop website which has quality checklists, which we'll talk about. We have governance. We have a GitHub starter template. So if you're starting a project and you want it to be inner source ready, that you think it's going to grow, we have a template that you could just work off of. And we created roles and responsibilities. We've hosted so many internal presentations. We've teaching people about new projects. Martin spoke at a presentation last week. I'm speaking at a presentation this week.
Thank
And
you.
we just want to keep, yeah, that was fantastic, by the way. And we just want to keep this momentum growing. And so we then took it a step further and decided to build a guild. And the guild, the Inner Source Guild, fancy. It takes members from all across the organization, which we'll talk about soon.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And so Tanya was actually asking in the chat about are there meetups for Inner Source? And there are. This is where we met, in fact. Innersourcecommons.org is a great place to go to learn all about that. Is there any places you've done, or is that mostly where you kind of hang out? Is it Inner Source Commons and things? Or?
Since I'm very new into community and open source, inner source, I mean, I've only been doing this for about 2 years now, not even 2 years. So I'm slowly building up where I'm learning from. But Inner Source Commons has been my main key inner source community, which I mean, it's a fantastic one.
Yeah, definitely. And they're very welcoming, and they have lots of, interesting sort of discussions every now and then as well. So it's great. Anyway, you mentioned guilds, and that was a good term. I like that term. So in the Octaverse report, octaverse.github.com, I'm lucky enough to have Dr. Nicole Forsgren as a colleague on the team. And as part of the research that they've been doing is identifying a strong correlation between high performers and high-performing organizations, and the fact that they build these communities of practice, of these internal networks inside their organizations that people can share, which is kind of what Inner Source is, really. So, like that guild thing you said, what is that? Like, can you how did you, why did you go in that direction? What is it?
Well, it just made sense to us because it's so important to get multiple perspectives when you're starting something new. And you may think that your way is the best way, and I've been guilty of this, but sometimes it's not. And so in the truth, I know,
How
but
dare you?
I know, right? But in the true nature of Inner Source, we collaborated. So we have members from our architecture organization, our security organization, the open source program office, and senior leadership. And it was really important to have higher level executives in the guild to share our message from moving from our organic growth into the key successes and guidance on measuring business impact, because they are the team members that are going to put us in front of the right groups to make this change happen.
Yeah, definitely. Is that how you see them? Is that how you see them improving the culture of engineering at Comcast? Is it by SLT kind of highlighting some of these things? How have you seen that improve?
The culture itself, it does take place in an executive level mindset, but it also takes place as a team mindset. And
Right.
we want to celebrate that you're getting the perspectives from all different sorts of people for buy-in. And if you have somebody that's saying, this is a great idea, I would like you and your group to put more focus on it, that's going to motivate the engineers and technologists to do it. And
Yeah.
so we started vetting projects, seeing which ones will have great impact. We started off with a few, and now we have several. And we work with teams in the internal community to get the project noticed. We want your project to get followers and contributors. We want, we make sure that you have blog posts. We have educational showcase series. We empower innovation and within the community itself. And what's really cool is we're seeing more executive level management showing up to our showcase series, which is really awesome. And that's been fantastic. And we guide the mindset for changing the concept of transparency and cultivating that collaboration within engineering. Because what you mentioned earlier, sometimes we just, this is my project. I'm building it from the ground up. I'm seeing it through. I'm not sharing it. Nope. So we want to change that idea. It's true. So we want to change that idea. And so we aid the teams working with the inner source sphere to accelerate that development.
Awesome. And we've got a question from Dan over in the Q&A tab. So remember, if you've got questions, please head over to the Q&A tab on the right-hand side and ask your questions there. And Dan was actually asking how you increase the adoption of inner source practices within, assumes there are many teams at Comcast. And I was also, you mentioned these internal presentations and the how-tos that you shared within your team. So do you mind sharing some of those tips to give people, that you give people inside Comcast as they embark on kind of their inner source projects?
The squeaky wheel gets the grease. I'm being completely honest. I am not afraid to talk to anyone. I will talk to you about your project, even if I don't know what's working on it. I will, develop game plans for your project. I will advocate for your project. And we try to get people so excited that they then share about our group. They then say, well, this was successful. Then it just starts to grow and build momentum. And that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. So have you done any like checklists or anything like that on how to get accepted as an inner source repo or anything?
Absolutely. So, I mean, checklists, it's another checklist, check mark off all the boxes. But we created an inner source checklist to not only be able to share these 5 pillars, which I'm about to, and display them, but it's just good to have your project based off of clarity. It's really good to be transparent, having your project open. We want to have your project open, no secrets. We want you to follow along the best practices for your company's internal use. Communication. It's very simple as, does your project have a README? Do you have a contributing guide? Do you have a code of conduct? Even like the smallest thing, a 2-sentence about section. That's really, really, really important. And then does your external contributor know who to contact? Who's your trusted committer? And then, of course, before your project goes open, we want to build that culture. And so you have the executive level buy-in, which is fantastic. And then a little bit going back to, team ownership. We want teams to make their own decisions. So we have that meritocracy concept where you have your trusted committer, you establish your SLA times for your pull requests and reviews. We want you to feel comfortable in the way that you work, but yet following best practices for what makes a strong project. And then also community. We showcase your project in a variety of ways. We want you to give thanks the many ways that you can and just keep building that positive momentum so your project can get to where it is.
Fantastic. So I've got a question from Patricia, which kind of aligns with one of the questions I was going to ask you. So I'll combine the two. So Patricia was asking, are you using some kind of framework or build for inner source? He's also asking about information around inner source practices. So innersourcecommons.org is, I think, where we would send you to get started on inner source practices. There's also on the GitHub documentation, there's a ton of information there about inner source. But you're big users of GitHub at Comcast, and I know you use lots of other tooling as well. So what other tooling and things have you found yourself building, to help improve the developer experience of your teams?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, and somebody please put into the chat, wasn't there like 1.5 billion open source projects that are housed in GitHub? Some huge
busy
number. Yeah, it's a huge number. So that kind of goes with the same thing within your company. I mean, think about how many projects are housed in GitHub within your company. Well, you can't have 1,500 projects completely all inner sourced and me going in and be like, I want to work on Terraform. How am I going to find that? It's very, very challenging to do. So we created a dashboard, a searchable dashboard, where if your project is ready to go, your README is up to date, everything looks really, really good from our side. We put your project in a dashboard that's sortable by code type, sortable by program, sortable by what your project is all about. We rate your project based on the amount of stars, open pull requests. You can see how many closed pull requests. Everything's listed there. So if I, being a program manager, want to go in and learn to make some documentation changes, I can see right at a glance where I'm needed. And that's been really, really, really helpful. And it all leads back to the guiding principles of what our checklist is based off of. And that's pretty much where it is. It's pretty cool. It's a good common tool that we're all using.
Fantastic. Yeah. We've also got another question here around, when projects are sharing internally, do they all work the same way, or do you have teams that share projects differently, or is there is it a cookie cutter approach and everybody follows the same thing, or does it kind of differ between projects?
Well, you still want to have that autonomy and you still want to have independence and you want to empower people to utilize their program plans the way that they do. So many teams that share projects share them differently, and it's okay. It's 100% okay. It depends on your development cycle and where you want to gather that external collaboration. Do you want a slew of pull requests coming into your project, or do you want to limit it? Do you want to have a limited amount of issues that you want people to work on externally? And that's okay. And so that's another reason why we created a governance model. It creates expectations for all team members that you can decide what you want to do. You can have a program manager running your inner source program. You can have a product manager running it if you want to. Do you have trusted committers? Do you have lead maintainers? So those are all of the things that we put in place that we have seen have been very successful within the life cycle of the inner source projects.
Yeah. And remember, people, if you've got questions for Brittany's an amazing source of knowledge around all this, the inner source and how it actually works inside companies. And what's been fascinating for me, Brittany, is how much of your journey kind of aligns with the journey. I used to work at Microsoft before I came to GitHub, and the journey I saw kind of helping Microsoft move over towards inner source. It took them longer than it took you, but there's a lot of engineers as well, so I guess. But no, if you've got questions of Brittany and things we want to talk about during this discussion, do let us know. If you use the Q&A panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and then we'll definitely make sure we get to your questions. But I've got a couple more, if that's all right with you, Brittany. So,
and I wanted to check in too, mentioning your journey at Microsoft.
Yeah.
You said that's something to think about. It's very common. It's a very common idea that you think collaboration and this is how everything's going to be successful. And we see that's what Inner Source Commons does as well. We see so many companies trying to go down the same path, but it's still just a little bit different, and so just trying to get that
where
going.
everybody everywhere works, isn't it? Like everyone has their own little tweaks they do on it, but it's amazing how much the same objections come up in different places. I know when I was at Universe a few weeks ago, and I think that this session's still available. The Inner Source office from Intuit came on, and we've spoken to Intuit as well, Inner Source Commons in the past. And there's some great people there, and they're doing some amazing things. And again, they have a different journey, but it's very similar learnings along the way. This notion of maintaining rather than owning, this notion of learning to share and like have trusted by default. In fact, actually, before we go on to my questions, that Drake Mossman actually had a question around sees Inner Source working at a large company, and hears about Inner Source being talked about at a large company. And Drake asked an interesting question. So, what size do you think a company is big enough to benefit from Inner Source? I have opinions, so I want your opinions first.
I do too. I don't think it doesn't matter on the size.
Yeah.
I don't think it matters on what size of the company that you're working on. It's all best practices on how to be successful. It's standing up a repository properly. It's opening up that collaboration. It's having community. It's you could have a company of 10 people or a company of 100,000 people. It could still work. That's just my opinion. If it's done well, it'll be good.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Inner Source is a fancy name for something that happens naturally in a smaller company, and that this culture of sharing, and that everybody kind of has read access and knows what's going on everywhere else, and building a community happens naturally when there's only 3 or 4 of you in the company, and moving up to 10. Once it gets, I always say, once your company gets bigger than once you can't all fit on a bus, I don't know if this translates into American, so hopefully it does. Once you can't fit everybody onto a bus, that's when you start having communication problems. So you normally get, buses are normally 25 to 50 seater kind of thing. So once you get to that kind of size is when you start having these comms problems in between teams, and you start to need to put structures into place to enable sharing, because without the structure, the sharing isn't happening organically like it does in a smaller place. And I think inner source is quite common, is a term we use for using open source practices sharing inside a company. But it becomes a program when you get a bit bigger, because then you have to actually kind of create communities and create structure and create guidance that kind of forces the sharing that might otherwise happen naturally. I don't know. What do you think?
I think I can completely agree. The smaller the company, yes, the easier it is to communicate. But if you're looking at a large company, look at us. We had to create an infrastructure to make this happen. We had to create a program to make this happen.
Yeah.
And, if let's say if your company is small, you could start small and then scale that as your best practice. And then it would just naturally grow, as opposed to starting something essentially new and then bringing that into a large frame.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's because in the bigger companies, you tend to get very siloed. Like it's very, very easy to, the bigger the company is, the more specialized you can get in your roles, kind of thing. And it's very easy to get a sort of detached from customers, so you're not having this real, flow of value to a customer. When you're a small company, you have to talk to customers because nobody else is going to pick up that phone. So you kind of have to. Whereas when you get into a bigger company, there are people that pick up phones and talk to customers and sell things, and then there are people that build software, and there are people. When I joined Microsoft, so I was in a startup that got acquired by Microsoft, and I just remember being and then helped acquire GitHub, and then went and moved over to GitHub. So this is quite nice. I'm back in smaller company world. I quite like it. But when I was joined Microsoft, I remember like I was in a 5-person startup before then. And, we did everything, like every answering support email, you just did everything because there was only 5 of us. And I remember going to the Microsoft like head offices in Redmond. It's like they've got this massive campus there. And I remember going in and went for a coffee. Like they have cafeterias where they give free coffee to all the workers, and like this soda in fridges, and you just go help yourself. Already slightly mind-blowing. I went for a cup of coffee with somebody, and I realized they had a full-time barista whose full-time job it was to serve coffee for money to people who already get coffee for free elsewhere in the company. And I was like, and then I saw somebody coming out of the toilet having cleaned the toilet for them, and I was like, wow, this is definitely a different life to what we had in a startup. So yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted. Right, let's go back to the questions. If you've got questions, please go to the Q&A tab on the right hand side.
I like the tangents. I find them to be very entertaining.
Well, but one last tangent on that. When I use, because again, being in startup land, and you'll get this from being in teacher land, like you go into these corporate conference rooms and you're like, that is a very expensive chair, compared to like teaching that. When you're like, you sort of can't help nick pets stationery because you're not used to having free stationery. You used to having to provide stationery yourself.
Ooh, Post-its.
Yeah, hello. I used to I was like, oh, that's a 3-seat chair, because I would have to sell 3 seats of my software to be able to buy that chair that was in a conference room. Anyway, right, I'm going back to questions. Please pile them in the Q&A panel on the right side. Oh my goodness, we've got a lot while we've been jibber jabbering. Okay, right. Great question from Joyce, actually. How do you in Comcast align priorities between the teams to show consistent progress on deadlines, when that's causing delays? And this is one of the interesting things people have about inner source, and this is why inner source works, because teams have different deadlines across the company. So yeah, how do you in Comcast kind of align priorities among the teams and assure they have like consistent progress and deliver on deadlines while they're working with inner source?
So Joyce, I'm going to have to do a part 2 because we haven't come across that issue yet. I'm being, like I said, we haven't quite gotten there. We're scaling very large projects where we started with smaller projects, but we're getting larger. So I will have to, once I get that experience, I will write up a blog post and I will definitely send it your way 100%. I don't want to blow smoke where I can't answer. I just have to be honest there.
I've definitely had that experience working in a big company. So yeah, it's definitely something I see. And so I'm going to do it. This is the advantage of doing these conferences from home, is you can do like a show and tell. So
Oh
this
yeah.
is a book called Measure What Matters by John Doerr. And
hmm
this is kind of like the book that sort of teaches you all about OKRs.
hmm
OKRs, you know, it's like a KPI, but comes from Silicon Valley, really.
Yep.
You can think of it
I'm the
sort of.
super user in my organization for OKRs,
Boom,
objectives
there we
and key
go. And
results.
that's what
So
we
I'm very
actually
familiar.
use. Yeah,
hmm
we use, you're using OKRs already. There you go. So
Oh yeah.
to
We're
get
just not
alignment.
quite we're getting there with the intercept. Like that's my dream state is to have
Yeah.
OKRs rolling up, like so have your KRs rolling up and then flowing through what I was talking about earlier with OKRs, like trying to get them to all align within the inner source progress because that's where I want us to go. We just haven't
Yeah.
gotten there yet. So I mean, honestly, part two, I bet it'll be a completely different conversation next year.
No. Well,
hmm
what I find interesting is that like you still keep the OKRs that you've got for your individual divisions and individual
hmm
teams that are focusing on like delivering value to their customers across different divisions in the org. But the reason why inner source works is because, like open source, you're working with people who are collaborating with different priorities, kind of thing, because they're working on different things. Inner source is great at making sure there's this community that are sharing, working on shared components where you still have different priorities, where you're driving different OKRs for each other. And that's fine. And that's why this kind of asynchronous, you know, the pull request model, the notion
hmm
of maintaining, the notion of contributing and being able to fork and all that sort of stuff. I think that's why that works when you don't, when not everybody on the inner source team has the shared objectives. You don't have to. I think it's okay to have different ones. And is that how you work in Comcast? Like, are they different that people share, or is it tends to be shared components that one team is building for a thing and then shares out like that way?
Um, I can't really get too much into that, but
Okay,
I do know that I want the shared objectives, I want the
got
shared key
it.
results, I want the shared platforms to be happening, and
Yeah,
that's my dream state, which we're going to be working for. I notice the unifying processes. I'm seeing
yeah,
all the patterns that are happening, and
yeah.
so now that we've created this wonderful infrastructure, we're scaling, which is
Awesome.
very cool. But on the same, um, I guess I would say the same platform, the same idea of what is the KPI, what is the OKR, building a consistent community, building that consistent collaboration, consistent dialogue. And
Yeah,
that all boils back to your KRs and it all boils back to your KPIs.
yeah.
And so I do have the advantage of the OKR being the super user. So I
Hmm.
but
Fantastic. Hey, we've got another question here from Brian. Brian was asking, and now this is a telling question, so let's see what you say. For
Mhm.
those that work on an inner source project at Comcast, how is their time prioritized between that project and other product work that they're doing for their business unit?
Well, that's an excellent question. So as of right now, if we are getting a project that's inner source ready,
Hmm.
generally for that smaller faction of the team, that's your project. You're the trusted committer. You're the key collaborators. You're the ones that are making the project work so that others will be able to take it and consume it. To Martin's point, there's large consumers of inner source within an entire organization, and a very small percentage gives back. But you're the ones that are going to be working on that. So that's your priority. Now,
Yeah,
if it splits and diverges into something bigger, then that's a road that we would have to take, and then we would consult upon that. But I would want to hear from that team because you can't planning and structure and organization. Yes, you can have so many foundations of it and so many things that you can consider textbook, but
hmm,
there's so many things that are done on the fly with your own intuition. And so I would want to have a consult with that team to
yeah.
break apart and understand their priorities and how to make it work, if that makes any sense.
No,
I would
no,
need
that
like a
makes sense.
concrete example in front of me in order to provide a clear answer.
No, I agree. It's a total. It depends, isn't it? You know what I mean?
hmm
Because it depends on that particular team, how much of the thing they're delivering, how much the inner source project they're working on is core IP to what they're delivering, or if it's kind of like a framework thing that's coming in that they're working on as a as an after product. So are you working on this inner source library like to deliver this other thing? Or is it something that you've kind of built that you think, hey, this would be reusable if we did a little bit of extra work, and they're kind of pushing it out on the back end? And it very much depends which side. And it's a spectrum, isn't it, in reality? And it depends where you sit on that spectrum, I guess.
And then also too, to another point, inner source projects shouldn't be created to be dumped, just like open source projects. You can't, if you created an inner source project and you're like, well, I created this, I don't have time to work on it anymore. Well, that's probably not a quality candidate for inner source.
Yeah.
Because you're the guiding light, you're the focus, you're the person that people are relying on. And then maybe before you think, well, I'm building this inner source project, I'm not going to have time for it. Well, maybe shift your focus and maybe not build that project and see what else is out there in the company that potentially would meet that need, and then work with them.
Well, you mentioned governance earlier on. So, I mean, is it a rule for you that you need that if you're going to make something in a source that you need a maintainer that's going to respond to PRs and things? Or is that not a rule? Is it more a guideline, you know?
We're using it as a guideline for now.
Okay.
I think that as we scale, you're going to have to see that you will need a trusted committer. You're going to have to see that you're going to need a project or program manager managing that program as you're scaling. I personally would not want to submit a pull request to a project that I know that my team relies on, and then 3 months later, it's still sitting there. So you have to make those decisions for yourself, which is why we want to give teams the guidance and the autonomy to be able to do that. But we want them to do it with the best logical steps that they can. We provide the guidelines, we provide the consultations, we give them all the amplification that we can, but it's what you do with it. That's your education point. You have to motivate the contributors to do what would be best for their project.
Definitely.
I see a question about my cat. I don't know.
Drake I was just going to remind everybody. So there is a Q&A panel in the right-hand side. If you want to ask questions or vote up everybody else's questions, as you can tell already, I'm kind of taking them from the top of the list on the votes. Please do ask them in the Q&A tab. We've got another sort of 15 minutes of Brittany's time before we need to wrap up. So please do ask questions in there. So the cat will come, hopefully. I scared her off earlier on. She was sat on the chair. And
she was sitting here the whole time, and then she didn't make an appearance. Anyway, I'll go get her before we leave.
Yeah, definitely. Right. So one of the things you mentioned earlier was around inner source and kind of helping them become discoverable within the organization, and kind of, you mentioned about the readmes and things. So what guidance, this is actually a question from Sheila, what guidance do you give to help teams kind of market their inner source project internally? What if they don't want to write blog posts to present? How do you help them market things inside the company?
We do a lot for our engineers just because, we believe in their projects and we believe in the program. So we host showcase series. We have a large internal open source community. I know it's weird, internal open source community, but we have a lot of people that are in this community that we host showcase series for. We have different sorts of speaker series that we can set up for them. We help them with their blog posts. If they want to write one, we guide them through that process. We just advocate all of the time on behalf of our engineers. We can pair them up with other teams if they don't want to make that connection. We do a lot for our engineers and technologists to make sure that the project is successful. And then we do follow up as well to see, like, did it make a difference? What else do we need to do? What more do we need to do? So we do a lot to make sure that they get off the ground.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's really where your kind of developer relations, developer advocacy is coming to the fore internally as well. That's not something actually that we do at Microsoft at all, really. Kind of projects inside of Microsoft kind of have had to, they kind of have to sort of advertise themselves and do their own. They give guidance to people, but they don't really like tell them, there's no team that's helping them market. They have
I'm really loud
about it. Yeah, no,
I'm really loud, and I put myself out there. I don't care who I'm talking to. I'm like, hey, check this out. Here, look.
You need these people. You need people who are like the mavens, that bring people together and build networks and build communities. That's what it's all about. That's what this inner source thing is about. Okay, got a question from Jeff Sado, who's a longtime friend of mine, actually. So Jeff was asking, this is fairly specific. So what have been your 3 biggest challenges in the journey? Like the aha moments. So he's asked for 3. Don't worry if you can't think of 3. I'm not going to hold you to that. But what were the biggest moments along this journey?
I actually have them written down. Let me take a look.
Okay,
No,
cool.
I think so I think one of the biggest aha moments really was the concept of a trusted committer. I learned that at Inner Source Commons, and I realized, I believe it was Sonia and, oh gosh, Johan's talking about the trusted committer, and it's a YouTube video
Right.
that they have. And it's so important that I didn't think about, because they're really the path to like frictionless engineering. They're the ones that are reviewing the pull requests. They're the ones that are taking the lead. They're the ones that are buying into it and taking the time to buy into and helping, people, external contributors. And I think having trusted committers is super important. Now, if the teams don't want to adopt them right away, that's fine. I highly encourage it. So I'm just like, hey, you want one of these. I also think that another hard challenge that we had was getting the projects. It's hard when we've been working one way, and I'm not saying like we as in Comcast, but sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to be like, okay, well, this is a cool README, but where's your contributing guide? Can you add more? Can you add more? And it's just like being a product owner, an engineer, or a technologist that's working on it, and you're like, ugh, I have to do more on this.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Everyone knows how to use this project. It's so simple. It's self-documenting. Anybody could use this.
Yeah, and I think that would be like two of the things, because we all are working so hard all across all of these companies, and it's just like you almost feel bad. You're like, well, you have to do more. And I don't know. That's my thing, but that's how I feel. Those are my top 2.
Okay, there we go. Well, we actually, let's see. Jeff actually had another question while we're having the Jeff moment here. So he was also asking about what happens with QA, sort of bug fixing of the inner source components. Who fixes the bug on something that somebody's reported internally? Is there an expectation that the team who own it fix issues that get found, or are people expected to bring their own fixes as well?
It's all circumstantial. Circumstantial. If it's so for me, for example, let's say I submitted to a project that Martin is owner, and I submitted it. Martin didn't review it, and it threw a bug, and you just merged it, and it threw a bug. Well, I think that would be a little column A, column B, like, hey, we need to work on this together. That's one way you can look at it. Or if somebody files a bug, you think about, well, is it a high level priority? Do I have time in my sprint cycle to get this done? Let me go back to the person that reported it. Maybe we can collaborate together, or maybe I could throw this to them and say, hey, you want to give this a whirl? It's always good for your network, and it's good for your career and growth to say like, hey, at the end of the day, I worked on something outside of my wheelhouse and was successful about it. So it's all circumstantial is what I would get to.
Okay. It depends.
It really does. It really, I mean, it really does. Like anything is in life. It depends how you look at it.
Well, I've probably got about 6 minutes left of your time. So remember, if you've got any questions, please do put them in the Q&A tab on the right-hand side. So we're going to try and get through a bunch more that we've got here, because we've got loads here. So we're going to try and get through a bunch of them before we finish off. So, right, Patricia's got a question. I'm going to rephrase this one a bit, Patricia, for you. Hopefully I'm rephrasing this right for you. So in your opinion, Brittany, is inner source better orientated to kind of client software, a UI software, or to the work, or maybe even like the development, or is it more suited towards the operation side of the house, so like DBAs and deployment scripts and SQL scripts, that sort of thing? Which do you think is either side? Is it better suited to either side or not?
I'm an equal opportunist. I think if your project's good, and if you have the documentation and you're clear and you're welcoming, it doesn't matter what type of project it is. I mean, I have an internal website that I manage, and my team and I manage. I don't want to be like that person. We all manage this site. Please fix something for us. Like it's fine. It doesn't matter if it's, Terraform. It doesn't matter. I think everything's welcome as long as the project is, well documented and able to be understood.
No, I agree. Well, I actually this actually Robert adds a question. Robert Love has a question of is there a way to build inner source organically? And I've actually seen more organic adoption of inner source among like DBA teams and kind of ops teams who are just they've moved to a mode where they're literally just dumping their SQL scripts that they're working on, or their ARM templates, or their PowerShell, or their Bash scripts. They're putting them into a repo for their team, and it's designed for their team and for their use. But they're making them globally readable, to across the company. But they're not really documenting it as a project. They're kind of just putting them there. Because then when they get DM'd from somebody else across the organization, hey, can you help me? Can you do this? How do you do this kind of thing? They just refer to scripts they've done that are similar but different to what this person's asking, and kind of share things like that. And we tend to talk a lot about the development teams often, in terms of inner source, because we think of like software components and libraries, and that's kind of how we think of open source. But just having these ops teams sharing organically seems to be a really great way of getting buy-in from inner source from the whole organization, not just from the devs that want to use all the dev shiny new tools and all that sort of
Absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah. I mean, just building that organic, that conversation point, I think that's really huge. And
Yeah.
I look forward to teams trying to organically do it on their own and then come to us and asking us if they're ready.
Yeah.
That would be great. That would be great. I mean, that's just we're finding teams that we haven't even consulted with creating their own marketing documents before
Cool.
they even come to us, and we didn't even make that like a requirement. And so people are really just thinking outside of the box, and it's been really cool to see what has happened over the past year.
Yeah, especially as you start to build the community, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a community that people can, because it runs like an open source project inside the organization, you can be there as a lurker, passively just kind of seeing what's happening. It's one of the things that like Clubhouse is big with the kids right now in terms of the social network and all that sort of stuff. But it's one of the things that's kind of put me off joining, because I'm like, can I just go lurk in the background and listen, and that's one of the things I like about open source and inner source projects, is
Mm-hmm.
that you can go in, lurk and listen, and you can learn from the smartest people in the world about how they've done the most amazing things, and really like do some research yourself, so that when you do ask the questions, you're asking sensible questions. You know what I mean? You're asking a good question and not kind of wasting it. Anyway, right then, speaking of asking questions, how about that for a segue? George Harley has a question for us. George was asking, do you have any particular metrics around community compliance, such as repositories that are configured how you would like them to be? How you're looking for success? Like, do you have any kind of in that analytics dashboard you talked about earlier, do you have any kind of metrics there that you look at?
Not really. Along the lines of community compliance, I would need a little bit more to kind of talk about that. Because when I look at compliance from an open source role, I never really thought about it from an inner source perspective.
Yeah.
So I don't know how I would I'm a transparent person. I don't know how I would answer that question.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Joyce has a question about does inner source work well with agile environments where product owners are trying to, in quotes, there's always, it's interesting, these questions, there's always got
Mm-hmm.
context in them, you can always read them. Anyway, Joyce is asking, does it work well with agile teams where product owners are wanting to protect the team from outside requests?
And that once again comes down to the meritocracy pillar. That's a developed in a how you work plan. What works best for your team? Do you want to have your project to be inner source and have people fix certain issues, or have your trusted committer do it? That all just comes down to how you work. And that would be where I would want to sit down with that group and say, hey, what would you like to see happen? How can we make this fit with these concepts and these ideals into your best practices that meet the need of everyone?
Yeah, no,
Mhm.
definitely. And then we've got two quick questions before we're going to wrap up here. So the first super quick question from Chris, and it's a burning question, is what's the grey book 3 down from the one on Dali, the one that was just above your head there?
This one, The Art of Imagination, it's like kind of an old comic type deal book. it's pretty wild
Cool.
stuff.
There we go.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna, like, with a breakneck from that question, Tanya's got a question about did you have to document a standard operating procedure or anything like that? Like, have you got kind of internal documentation how people do this inside of
Yes.
Comcast?
Oh
Okay.
yeah. Oh yeah. We
And is
have.
that an inner source project in itself? Can people contribute to it and improve it?
Yes, you can. Of course,
Ooh.
everything that we do is inner source. So, I mean, definitely, if you wanted to change change something on our governance, I would love to have a conversation with you and see why. And
Mm-hmm.
that therefore leads going back to what we may think is the best way might not always be. And that's the true form of collaboration, is to listen and learn and take in what other people can bring to the table. And that's always just so fantastic.
That's fantastic. And I want to thank you for listening and learning from our audience here. It's been I've really enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate it.
Great.
So before we wrap up, any last sort of parting tips or advice that you want to share with folks, Brittany, on how to get started, or, anything you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a lot of work getting something like this going, and
Yeah.
but that's totally okay. It's exciting, it's motivating, it's doing something new, but all I can say is just hang in there, and it's going to be worth it in the grand scheme of things. And really finding solutions for common problems is something that we think is very easy, but it's actually very complex. And so I just say, like, stick with it. And also, my biggest thing is, even in work and outside of work, just be kind to one another. That's just personally, I think, this current juncture in life, I think we all just need to be a little this kind and forgiving, and just, I don't know, just be cool. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. It's finishing on the famous words of Bill and Ted. So yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time and joining us here on In Focus this week. So we'll let you go now, but thank you very much, Brittany. Take care.
Yeah,
I'll see you again soon.
this was fantastic. Take care, team.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate Brittany joining us. Remember, we've got more of these sessions coming up all week. Tomorrow, we have an enterprise roundtable that's on creating a culture of collaboration. And that'll be a collaborative session. That actually won't be recorded. Today's session was recorded, and you'll find the video available back at the website infocus.github.com. And you'll also be emailed with all these links and everything else to be able to download these things later on. But please do join us again tomorrow for a super interactive conversation. On Friday, if you want to learn more about GitHub Actions, then please come over and join the Getting Traction with GitHub Actions session, where we're going to have a real deep dive onto some of that automation. And I want all your best questions there for me, and see how that one goes. Now, remember, if you'd like a deeper dive on anything we've talked about here today, or anything we're talking about all week, actually, then just click on the Book a Meeting button that's on, like, the top right of your screen, hopefully. And one of the team will get in touch with you shortly. And last but not least, please take a minute or two. If you go to the Docs tab, you'll see there's a short survey link in there, which I know some of you maybe have already answered it, but if you haven't answered it yet, please do. Go in, tell us about your experience with the In Focus conference. This is kind of a new thing for us. We're trying to be respectful of everybody's time and kind of split things out over a few days. So we'd love to know what you think about the format, how you've been enjoying the sessions, what you would like to do differently. You'll find the link to that survey in the Documents tab at the right of your screen. And we've designed this program for you, and it's kind of, we're trying to do things a little bit differently and be respectful of everybody's time. So please make sure you let us know what you think about it, so we can make sure we're giving you the best value we can for the time that you spent sharing with us. And again, really do appreciate you sharing this time. But everyone takes the feedback very seriously, so please do let us know. And without further ado, I'm going to wrap up here now, I think. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you joining us here today. Thank you for all the amazing questions. I'm very sorry that the promised cat didn't join us, but hopefully we'll post pictures of the cat later on. So she's wonderful. I've met her many times before. But yeah, thank you for your time, and we'll see you again tomorrow for GitHub in Focus. Take care. Bye-bye.